evening and welcome to Africa Speaks right on Pan-African Television, coming to you live from our studios at Abelimpe 48, Swanika Street, Accra, Ghana. My name is Victoria Wilson, and France was thrown out of the Sahel, but this week it is in Nairobi. Macron, Ruto and 30 African head of states are gathered for the African Forward Summit, the first France-African summit ever held in an English-speaking African countries. 800 French soldiers are already on Kenyan soil. A new defense pact has been just signed, and in the streets outside the summit, a counter-summit is organizing under one banner. The African masses reject Francafrique in all its form. This is what empires look like when it is forced to relocate. And this is what resistance looks like when it is winning ground. Stay with us as we bring you more details on our Spotlight segment with Daniel Otu Asante.
Tonight on Africa Speaks Spotlight, we focus on a political call from Nairobi, Kenya, one that is reigniting conversations about African unity, economic liberation and resistance against imperialism. From May 11 to 12, activists, socialist organizations, trade unions, students and Pan-African movements from across the continent gathered for a Pan-Africanism summit against imperialism known as PASAI. The summit was organized as a counter-summit to the France-Africa Forward Summit held in Nairobi during the same period. But this was not just another political gathering, it was a direct challenge to the economic and political system that many Africans believe continue to keep the continent dependent on foreign powers decades after independence. According to reports by the People's Dispatch, organizers of PASAI described the official France-Africa Summit as a rebranded offensive of imperialist recolonization. They are wary of France, which has been expelled from many parts of West Africa and has lost its standing across the continent. Anti-imperialist activists are clear that the summit is an attempt by France to reposition itself and focus on Anglophone countries, especially in East Africa. Behind all the talks about climate, finance, green energy and investment partnerships lies the familiar imperialist maneuvers. In fact, France troops will be stationed on Kenyan soil as part of defense agreements between the two countries. The Kenyan state's approach to this concerns is also revealing when participants at the conference took out a march to the statue of anti-colonial icon Dedan Kimathi. The police tear gassed the crowd and arrested 19 activists over 2 days, including international delegates. The repression will not, however, prevent this message from resonating in the minds of Africans. Africa remains the richest continent in natural resources, from gold in Ghana, cobalt in Congo, uranium in Niger, to oil across the continent. Africa continues to supply the world's industry, yet millions of Africans still battle unemployment, poor healthcare, housing crisis, hunger, and weak industrial development. Meanwhile, France, the United States, and other imperialist powers continue to influence every aspect of people's lives. They range from military deployment to skewed trade deals to establishing dominion over resources. Meanwhile, governments in Africa are forced to implement austerity policies which drastically reduces spending on the people. Thus, it is clear that imperialism never truly ended. It simply evolved. This is the very warning Ghana's Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah gave decades ago when he spoke about neocolonialism, a system where African states appear to be politically independent but remains economically controlled from abroad. For anti-imperialist activists, the solution lies in reviving true Pan-Africanism, African unity built on self-reliance, social planning, industrialization and collective ownership of resources from the benefit of ordinary people. The struggle is not simple against France or Western powers. It is against any system that allows Africa's wealth to enrich foreign interests while African masses remain poor. It is against a system that places the needs of workers, farmers, and the youth above the profit of multinationals, corporation, and social elites. Because the real question facing African today is not whether the continent is rich, but who controls the world? And in Nairobi this week, voices from across Africa gathered to declare that Africa's future must finally belong to Africa. This is a Spotlight segment, and my name is Danny Otuesante.
Thank you so much, Daniel Tuasante, for bringing us up to speed the happenings in Kenya. And now, to understand what that movement is fighting for, we turn to one of its leading voices. Joining us is Comrade Buka Omole of the Communist Party Marxist Kenya, who has called this summit a war council of imperialism convened under the mask of diplomacy. We ask him what the movement is organizing and what Pan-African unity demands of African leaders sitting in the room with Macron today. So this is Africa Speaks right here on Pan-African Television, and you are watching us, which we are broadcasting live across some 46 African countries and some parts of Europe. Tonight, to help us understand the new wave of, France imperialism that is emerging in East Africa, we've been joined by the General Secretary of the Communist Party Marxist Kenya to help us understand the issues and what is going on. You're welcome, Comrade Buka Omole.
Thank you very much, comrade, and I look forward to having a pleasant discussions, at least to bring to the fore how imperialism in general, and particularly French imperialism, continue to manifest itself in the African continent.
All right, sure. So, comrade, over the past few years, we have seen a strong pushback against France in West Africa, especially from the countries that form the alliance of the Sahel states. And it is in this context that the so-called France-African Summit is being held in Nairobi. How do you see France repositioning itself in the continent?
It's important to acknowledge that imperialism changes its forms,
right,
but its content remains the same.
Right.
So the French imperialism in the recent years has suffered humiliation. They have suffered several defeats in West Africa and the Sahel region, to be particular. Now, what you will have expected that the French will have given up their murderous and plunderous actions that has made them be chased out like dogs in the West Africa, to go back to Paris, in essence, to say clearly that Yankees should go home. But they're not going home. What they're doing is that they're now relocating to the east coast of the African continent. This reallocation is what has manifested into the current so-called Africa Forward French Summit that is scheduled to take place in Nairobi next week, particularly on the 11th and the 12th. And the issues that have been raised in a way to camouflage this imperialist offensive, because imperialism also thrives on deception.
Yeah.
So that is why the Communist Party, Marxist Kenya, among other anti-imperialist organizations, have also organized a counter summit, PASAI, which is the Pan-Africanism Summit Against Imperialism, to give more clarity on this imperialist offensive and what it means to the ordinary Kenyan working class and the African people at large.
Right. Before we go to the counter summit that you're trying to organize, specifically in the Kenyan context, what has French government been offering Nairobi, and what kind of conditions is it setting in return?
It's important that we acknowledge what in preparation to this imperialist offensive, the first bill that was tabled in Nairobi, that is in the parliament, was a bill to ensure that French military personnel cannot be tried in Kenya. That means the French military personnel can commit all atrocities that they so wish, but they will not face the Kenyan criminal justice system. This bill has since passed. The same bill adds to the list of people that cannot be tried by the Kenyan criminal justice system, not just the French, but now we have the British and we have the United States military men. But remember, the military pact that has also been signed by President William Samoei Ruto is not being discussed at all. This is what we need to remind the Kenyan people, that what is flooded in the media is about trade, cooperation,
Right.
Environment, like what you call to deceive the Kenyan masses that they are only expected to have more to gain by having cooperation with French. But this is what the Communist Party Marxists, among other anti-imperialist organizations, want to remind the Kenyan people that at the background of it, there is an architect of an occupation in Kenya. Because you cannot say that you want to have a military cooperation where this military cooperation is just crowded with French occupation tendencies. For example, if I occupy your country, it basically means that you cannot try me in that country.
Right.
So to go to even the very nitty-gritties of having cooperation in terms of trade. And we remember that one of the biggest loaning partners here to our government is the Paris Club. So some of those things, we are going to discuss them in great detail and to try to bring some reason to the minds of the Kenyan working class that this imperialist offensive, and now no one is safe if we do not oppose it.
Right, right. Comrade, that especially I would link this example to, the western part of Africa. Still talking about the AES countries and how they, expelled these French militaries and then their military bases out of the country. That is what happened there. But it looks as though it is not so, and then the Kenyan government is kind of accepting these French imperialists who were ousted out of the country, receiving them on that part of the continent. So what do you think is prompting the Kenyan government to take up the role of being such a key partner of France, which is being pushed out of other parts of the continent?
We know the character of the Kenyan state and the character of the Kenyan government, that the current Kenyan government is a comprado class. It is a broker of foreign interest. Kenya is not a sovereign country at all, because the political leaders in our country are actually appointees to manage the Kenyan affairs on behalf of foreign interests, particularly on behalf of United States imperialism and their junior pastors in Europe. This is what we must understand, that the welcoming of this French Africa summit and the making it clouded, to deceive the Kenyan people is being done on behalf of imperialism by the local leaders here in Nairobi. These local leaders, you realize that when the elections are coming up, President William Samoei Ruto and other politicians always have a tour to go to the United States, to go to Europe, to particularly ask for arms, and to make sure that they can sign some secret contracts to protect foreign interests in our country. President William Samoei Ruto is actually a United States puppet. He's actually an imperialist puppet here. He is not, a sovereign leader, because you cannot imagine that after French has committed so much atrocities, in fact, we've even been able to see in several clips of young Malian children, young, children in West Africa, pointing at French soldiers and calling them murderers, calling them plunderers. But you cannot tell me that President William Samoei Ruto does not understand that the French offensive is actually offensive of plunder. It is offensive of bloodshed. But since his interest is not just personal interest, but is the caretaker of the neo-colonial government on behalf of the foreign interest, particularly United States imperialism. We did not expect President William Samoei Ruto to do otherwise, other than to work for his employers, other than to work for his peers. So he's here in the country only to advance the interest of the people who have put him in power.
Right.
So that is why for us, we always say that until the fight for sovereignty is complete under the National Democratic Revolution, then the Communist Party, Marxist Kenya, hold the clarity that there will be no development, or there will be no socialist construction within the ultimate win of both economic, social, and political independence of our country. All these flag independence in 1963 were actually to relaunch a caretaker government, now to rule the Kenyan people indirectly. So the French imperialists are not here as white administrators, but they have appointed black administrators to actually oversee the Kenyan affairs on their behalf.
That is new colonialism. Yeah, sure, comrade. You see that it is very sad that part of the world, or most leaders of the African continent seem to be in bed with these imperialists. Therefore, they did not seek to advance the aspirations and wishes of the ordinary people of the various countries. Now, let's talk about the counter summit that your organization is putting together. Now, your party, the CPMK, is one of the key organizers of the Counter Summit, which is the Pan-Africanism Summit Against Imperialism, which is being organized in Nairobi. Can you tell us a bit about what the summit seeks to achieve?
The Communist Party, Marxist Kenya, has identified the primary enemy for the world, the protagonist that in its presence causes chaos, bloodshed. The biggest threat to world peace is the United States imperialism. So to organize for this counter summit is also an attempt to make sure that we can consolidate an anti-imperialist front to confront the principal enemy, which is imperialism, and particularly the primary aggressor, which is the United States imperialism, and now with the French imperialism. So the counter summit that is coming to Nairobi is to declare a confrontation and to tell the entire world that not everybody in Kenya has agreed to this imperialist offensive. So anything that is being portrayed in the Kenyan media as if the Kenyan people are waiting to dance and welcome Macron and his thieves from France here, it must also be demonstrated that the Communist Party, Marxist, and other anti-imperialist forces are offering a counterpose to such kind of offensive. The Pan-African Summit, the Pan-Africanism Summit against imperialism is coming to Nairobi, and we have invited across to 300 delegates that will be converging in Nairobi, almost the same number of delegates as the one that has been organized by President William Samoei Ruto. In fact, yesterday, as the guests started streaming into our country, we are also receiving guests, and the president is receiving guests. And what will happen is that we will have a political mobilization conference to try and debunk and counter the imperialist logic with the socialist logic, and try to bring new knowledge to the people about the real effects, devastating effects of imperialism. After that, there will be a confrontation in the streets. There will be a march, to demonstrate that the French imperialism coming to our country will never know peace here. So this is what is happening, that there will be a confrontation between the anti-imperialist and imperialist forces in Nairobi street. So on the 12th, we are going to march to occupy the African French Summit, to tell them that they are not welcomed in this country, that the given plunder that has actually happened in West Africa will not be tolerated even an inch in this country. this is what will be happening next. This is what will happen, this week, as we on the 11th and the 12th, and also there will be an offensive on the 13th, which is basically an occupation of the Kenyan law, the laws, the courts, to be in solidarity with political prisoners, and particularly myself, that has been abducted severally by the state.
Yeah. Oh. Okay, comrade. You know that beyond the counter summit, what kind of campaign must People's Movement conduct against this new French initiative? Because today they've moved from the West. Once they were cast out from the West, they moved from the West. Now it's in the eastern part of the country. You never know. Today is Nairobi. The next time it might be another country, and then they start spreading all over the continent. So how can movements across the continent push this agenda so that we tend to, counter these imperialist machinations of the French?
First of all, this is a war of the weak and the most powerful. This is what must be known, that to fight imperialism can only be done through the collective resistance from below.
Mm.
And our message to the third world, our message to the global south, that the strength of imperialism, particularly United States imperialism as the primary aggressor, is not invincible. And if we can mobilize as far as wide through mass organizations and bring the workers and the peasants together to collectively resist the lethal power of imperialism, then somehow we can salvage this this planet from total destruction.
Right.
Remember, United States now is the most dangerous imperialist power because the United States is dying. It is degenerating. So it's fighting a fight to maintain its hegemony. It's fighting a fight to make sure that it can return the world to unipolarity.
Yes.
It is fighting not just a fight of survival, because definitely, just like the Spanish Empire or the great powers of Britain, they fell. The United States must also accept either to fall in dignity or burn the whole planet through nukes. Because at the very end of it, the United States billionaires or dominance class have not accepted that the power has shifted greatly and they cannot win now any war, not just militarily, but even the propaganda war that they have been driving on to kill in the name of human rights and democracy has now been debunked. In fact, their offensive in Palestine has been able to expose the United States pretense about the international law, about human rights, about democracy. So everybody now looks at United States as aggressor, as so we will continue to advance this and remind the Kenyan people that the people who murdered Gaddafi are coming home. They are coming to Nairobi. The killers of Gaddafi, French imperialists, are the bombers of Tripoli. They are coming to Nairobi, but they are coming with a carrot and stick. They are coming with bombs under the table, but with only smiles across the table. This is what we must tell the Kenyan people. And before too long, there will be a confrontation. And we know that for a fact, imperialism has reached a level that now it has to be defeated through collective resistance. So there is no hope for French imperialism here in East Africa. They will be shattered and defeated, even more humiliated, like they were when committing atrocities for many years in West Africa, and particularly Sahel region.
Right. Thank you very much, Comrade Buka. Imperialism indeed is on the rampage, and definitely it will fall with our collective fight and our collective struggle. Thank you very much. We are glad having you today.
A luta continua. We know for a fact that victory is certain. Thank you. And to all our viewers, please remember to support the Pasai conference. You can highlight it on your social media. And you can also share our videos to help educate the global South on the importance of a united front against imperialism to help accelerate the independence of the countries in Africa.
Those were insightful conversations out there. Now, from the strategy of the movement, we turn now to those who have already pushed fronts out. In this segment, two voices from two fronts of the same struggle. First, we hear from Abdul in Niger on what the Alliance of Sahel States looks like from inside 2 years after expelling French troops. Then from that, we go to Nairobi, where a comrade organizing with the PASAI, the Pan-Africanism Summit Against Imperialism, the counter-summit confronting Macron arrival in the streets outside the official one. Let's get into it.
Tenter de répondre en une seule fois. Depuis l'arrivée au pouvoir du CNSP, c'est-à-dire le Conseil national pour la sauvegarde de la patrie, en juillet 2023, le Niger a engagé une rupture stratégique avec l'ancien modèle économique hérité de la France-Afrique, basé sur la dépendance alimentaire, l'exploitation brute des ressources nationales et la soumission aux institutions étrangères. Aujourd'hui, la vision portée par le président de la République, le général d'armée Abdourahmane Tchani, repose sur un principe fondamental. La souveraineté réelle ne peut exister sans souveraineté alimentaire, économique et politique. Dans ce cadre, l'un des projets les plus emblématiques est le programme de la grande irrigation, notamment dans la production du riz. Ce projet tient tellement à cœur le général d'armée Abdourahmane Tchani que c'est lui-même qui le suit. Ce programme représente bien plus qu'un projet agricole. C'est un projet révolutionnaire de libération économique nationale. Alors, pendant des décennies, malgré les immenses potentialités du fleuve Niger, qui traverse notre pays sur 550 km, et des terres irrigables, notre pays dépendait massivement d'importations de riz, de blé et de maïs. Cette dépendance fragilisait notre souveraineté et exposait notre peuple aux crises internationales et aux pressions étrangères. Alors, les militaires du CNSP ont donc décidé de renverser cette logique. Le programme de grande irrigation vise à moderniser, à réhabiliter de gros périmètres, des périmètres aménagés, plus de 21 000 hectares de nouvelles terres agricoles, mais également réhabiliter environ 10 000 hectares existants afin de réduire de 50% les importations de céréales d'ici 2027. Ce programme s'appuie sur plusieurs axes concrets. Alors, premièrement, on peut dire la maîtrise de l'eau grâce aux aménagements hydro-agricoles. Ensuite, on peut parler de la réhabilitation des périmètres abandonnés. On peut citer également le soutien direct aux producteurs locaux, mais également, il ne faut pas oublier la promotion du riz nigérien. Et pour finir, on peut surtout dire qu'il y a une mobilisation patriotique nationale autour de cette souveraineté alimentaire. D'ailleurs, nous avons vu plusieurs fois le général d'armée Abdourahmane Tchani lui-même visiter plusieurs sites agricoles comme ceux de Difa et Sagia afin de suivre personnellement l'évolution des travaux. Ce qui est important ici, c'est que pour la première fois depuis longtemps, je dirais même très longtemps, l'agriculture n'est plus considérée comme un simple secteur social secondaire, mais comme une question stratégique de sécurité nationale. Le général d'armée Abdourahmane Tchani a même déclaré que grâce aux efforts des producteurs et du programme de la grande irrigation, le Niger n'a pas connu de véritable période de soudure en 2025. Avec des produits alimentaires disponibles à des prix relativement accessibles aux populations. Cette dynamique de renouveau national ne vient pas uniquement de l'État. Elle repose également sur l'implication du peuple, c'est-à-dire c'est une implication populaire. Les paysans, les coopératives agricoles, les travailleurs et les femmes transformatrices et les jeunes jouent un rôle central dans cette révolution économique. Les femmes notamment, dans les filières de transformation et de commercialisation du riz local, participent activement à la relocalisation de l'économie nationale. Les coopératives rizicoles deviennent des espaces de patriotisme et surtout de révolution, je dirais bien, pour changer un peu la donne. Les citoyens comprennent aujourd'hui que consommer nigérien est devenu un acte de souveraineté. C'est pourquoi nous pouvons dire que le CNSP, que le général d'armée Abdurrahman Chani et ses frères d'armes tentent de construire un nouveau modèle inspiré des grandes expériences révolutionnaires africaines, notamment celle du capitaine Thomas Sankara, qui affirmait ceci: « Produisons ce que nous consommons et surtout consommons ce que nous produisons ». Cette phrase résume parfaitement la philosophie actuelle du Niger. La souveraineté n'est pas seulement militaire ou politique, elle commence dans le champ du paysan, dans la maîtrise de l'eau, dans la valorisation de nos ressources et dans la dignité économique de notre peuple. Le programme de la grande irrigation est donc l'une des manifestations concrètes de cette volonté historique du Niger de sortir enfin de la dépendance néocoloniale pour construire une véritable indépendance nationale.
So today we are here, comrades, at the center of Nairobi to protest against French imperialism in Kenya. After its defeat in the Sahel region, France is trying to reposition itself in the East African region. And today we are here to reject all the economic deals that have been signed and also to continue saying that we don't want military bases here in Kenya.
We are in Nairobi, where a two-day summit, a counter-summit by progressive forces in Kenya and the world, is concluding with a protest in Nairobi against the France-Africa summit that is being attended by France President Macron and being hosted by President Ruto and other 30 heads of state. Many see this conference summit in the first English-speaking country in Africa as a repositioning of this French influence and imperialist maneuvering. So this protest today is a counter to that.
Let's continue with our dispatches from Africa, where in South Africa there's been a rise in xenophobic attack on African migrants in Johannesburg and Cape Town. And Ghana, Nigeria and Kenya have summoned South African diplomats. How does a country whose liberation was sheltered by the rest of Africa now hunt fellow Africans? And in Accra, Ghana has walked away from a $109 million health deal, rejecting Washington's demand for access to its national health data. Zimbabwe refused the same last year, and Zambia is next. The price was finally named out loud. Let's get into the details.
Thank you very much for inviting me to comment on this important topic, and I appreciate that it is something that is being taken seriously, not only by Pan-African Television, but also by its membership, or its viewership, which is important not just because this is an important topic, but because there are a lot of points that I think are important for us to clarify around what we are dealing with when we are talking about xenophobia. I mean, this is something that has been in the news recently in South Africa and in relation to South Africa, and I'll come back to this, this has been a recurring crisis for the continent. Because, I mean, the first point that I want to make is that when you talk about this term xenophobia, which is very technically is concerned with a fear of strangers or foreigners, is a much broader category than what we are really dealing with. Because if you look at it, for the most part, the people that are being targeted, that are being victimized and brutalized in the kind of wave of what is called xenophobia are largely migrant workers that are of African origin and certainly are of a working class background. In other words, we are not seeing attacks on tourists and attacks on wealthy so-called investors. I mean, I'm sitting in South Africa at the moment. There are people that celebrate someone like Elon Musk and investment from Europe and North America as something that should be not just allowed, but should be celebrated. But it's those same people see it very differently when workers, many of whom are the descendants of workers who have built this country. I mean, if you know a little bit about the history of South Africa, the entire economy of South Africa was built on migrant labor. People coming from Malawi, people coming from Swaziland, from Zimbabwe, from all over, from the copper belt of Zambia. There was a train that used to run and workers used to come and build up this country. So the point about differences between people of different nationalities is not just that it's a fabrication and an invention, but it's also ahistorical. This is not really how this continent was built. None of us were invited to the Berlin meetings in 1884-85 that decided where the borders are going to be drawn, that are going to decide who is a stranger or a so-called foreigner and who isn't. So I think we need to start by clarifying that what we are dealing with here is an anti-working class, anti-African sentiment in many parts. And then the second point that I want to make is that as much as South Africa is in the news, this is a recurring phenomenon. I think you will remember that a few years ago, the president of Tunisia made a statement about how all these Black Africans are coming and national character of Tunisia. And very shortly after that, we saw attacks on dark-skinned people, regardless of whether they were actually of Tunisian birth or not. We've seen a similar thing in Libya. I mean, I'm talking to you who are based in Ghana. Last year, there were protests in the streets of Ghana saying that the Nigerians must go home. In the 1980s, there were protests in the streets of Nigeria saying the Ghanaians must go home. So the second point that I want to make is that what we are dealing with is not simply a kind of once-off random phenomenon. We are seeing a kind of rise of this anti-working class, anti-African sentiment. You might have seen that there was a person who happens to have been born in Ghana who was working in South Africa. He hadn't done anything wrong, who was being targeted and asked to produce papers, and he in fact produced them and was then told, no, we don't believe that these are correct papers, and was being humiliated in a way that is embarrassing to anyone to see. And this was done in a context where people are increasingly suffering, and no one is denying the challenges facing our communities, not just in South Africa, but across the continent. But what we are saying is that we need to not be confused about what is the cause of the real challenges that we face. Because if you look at the problem of unemployment in South Africa, it's over 40% of the population is unemployed. The total population of people that were not born in South Africa is less than 4%. The false solution that is being advanced by several groups that says you are able to fix the country by removing not foreigners in general, but specifically our fellow African workers. If you got rid of them, then everything will be fine. This is not just that is morally reprehensible. It is anti-Pan-Africanist. It is anti-historical. There's many reasons why this is an incorrect position. But most importantly, it's a false solution to a problem of capitalism. The problem of unemployment, the problems of poverty, the problems of inequality are not caused by people based on the fact that they were or were not born in South Africa. This is the product of neoliberal capitalism that has failed to provide solutions to the problems that are confronting our societies. So the scapegoating of people, many of whom are workers, like I said, who are migrants, who are just as, if not more, oppressed and exploited as the people that are being turned against them, is one of the biggest challenges that we are confronting. So it's important to call a spade a spade. What we are dealing with here is not some generalized xenophobia. This is, number one, the crisis of capitalism and imperialism and neocolonialism in our respective countries is making people correctly angry about their suffering. People are looking for places where they can place that anger. Opportunistic forces are trying to point at migrant fellow workers, particularly workers from Africa, who are being targeted and or are being scapegoated as the problem. And in the process, we are confronted by a reality where a capitalist class that is united, they are able to go and exploit and extract value from all corners of the continent without anyone asking them for their papers, are continuing to extract wealth from the natural endowment of our continent and its people, whilst there are divisions that are put between us. So perhaps in order to try and conclude, there are a few things that are important of what the movements and organizations are doing and must continue to do. One is that we have to clarify, we have to clean up the confusion between the causes of the problem and the symptoms. This is the first urgent task that we have, and many organizations have been doing this for a long time. In South Africa, there's an organization called Abahlali Basimjondolo, who since 2008 have been insisting that, yes, actions can be illegal, people can do things that are illegal, but human beings cannot be illegal. And therefore, this xenophobic, Afrophobic sentiment has to be rejected. So we have to raise levels of political education to understand what are the real problems and to overcome this tendency of seeking easy answers to complicated problems. And these are false answers because they are turning our friends against us whilst we are allowing enemies to run scot-free. Secondly, there is a need for us to kind of close some of the loopholes and the gaps that we've allowed to be opened up. For instance, it is the questions of documentation which are being held against migrant workers. It's our governments that are failing to document people, and they're not documenting people. And if they are, then they are placing more emphasis on where people were born than where they are working. To me, the fact that I am working in South Africa means that there's no reason why the South African government shouldn't be giving me papers clarifying that that's what I'm doing. In other words, there's a need for us to correct some of these divisions that have been created between the working class. But secondly, if you're exploited by capital, you're exploited by capital, regardless of where your papers are. So therefore, there's a need for us to insist that the rights of workers to be defended should not be tied to nationality. They are tied to the fact that they're being exploited at the points of production in the factories, in the mines, on the farms, etc. So there's a need for us to also tackle not the victims of exploitation, but the exploiters themselves. And then lastly, and then I will end, there is a need for us to quite urgently insist that these institutions and governments, whether it's the African Union or SADC or ECOWAS, with all the challenges that we know they have and the interests that we know they serve, it is a problem, at least from where I'm sitting, that there hasn't been a strong intervention from the African Union, which is supposed to carry the legacy of Kwame Nkrumah, who in 1963 insisted at the opening of the Organization of African Unity that we must unite as a continent. How can an African Union be so quiet and say nothing about the fact that the borders of Europe are being outsourced to a Tunisian government who is being compelled to stop migrant workers from moving as they have moved for centuries, and using abysmal mechanisms like this Afrophobic, xenophobic sentiment in order to do that? And these institutions are quiet. So there is a need for us to insist that they have to intervene, that we as movements, as organizations, as peace-loving people from across the continent and the world must continue to insist that we are not going to allow ourselves to be duped into turning on our brothers and sisters across the continent and the world, whilst we allow the people who are oppressing and exploiting us to get away scot-free. So those are some reflections from my side. I will leave it there.
Okay, thank you very much for having me on your show. So what we are discussing at the moment is an agreement that has been pursued by the United States of America, and essentially got to do with they supporting financially, that's money, and we having to give data in return, okay, help with data. But this is not limited to only Ghana. It's a similar deals have been given to a lot of countries, especially the third world countries, and we have about 32 countries sign on to such deals at the moment, about 30 of which are African countries. But in total, they are hoping to push a total of $20.6 billion US into such countries to support them. And US is supposed to pay $12.5 million of this amount, and there's remaining $7.5 million supposed to come, $1 billion to come in the form of co-investments with these countries. And all these are under the newly formed, or probably the new policy of United States aid that they give. They used to use this US aid, that the United States Agency for International Development, where they used to help these countries a lot. But after Trump came on as president, there's a new administration and new ways of doing things. And they now pursue what they call the America First Global Health Strategy, in which US probably proposes what they want, and they are very selfish about it. And on the other side, they think they want to help the receiving countries to be also play more active role and also contribute towards, and in the long term, lead to self-sufficiency. But this is a deal that they pushing down our throat, and it's not the best. In the case of Ghana, they are wishing to invest a total of $109 million US into our health sector. And out of this $109 million, we are supposed to co-finance about $60 to $70 million. And what they are wishing to do is they want us to surrender a health data, a very sensitive health data, to the United States for the next 25 years. Can you imagine that? In addition, it's not so clear how much Ghana will be contributing to such a deal, but US chooses to do whatever they want to do with the data that they collect from Ghanaians. And they have the authority, or they have the right to hand over such data to their pharmaceutical company, to allow these companies to commercialize it. They use our data based on our healthcare data. They're able to tell what kind of diseases we suffer a lot, what kind of medication we need. And they are going to capitalize on these manufactured drugs that will come back to our country to be sold to us in Africa. In addition, when such drugs come, per the deal, our authorities supposed to protect us, such as the Food and Drug Authority, don't have a say. This data is supposed to be stored in the United States and also be governed by the law of the United States of America, and not laws of Ghana. So, in fact, or in short, they are coming to take all our data, make use of it, and then we don't have in what they use for and how it's being used. And the most insulting part is this, an agreement which was drafted unilaterally by the United States without involving representatives from Ghana. And I think this not just beyond, this not just goes beyond the insult. It rather puts our data sovereignty in question. Okay, it undermines our intelligence and also our sovereignty. This amounts to what we call neocolonialism. It's a new way of they getting involved in our affairs and controlling us. Because imagine such data gets to them, they are going to weaponize it or probably monetize it and make a lot of money from it. And these monies are monies that they are coming to make from us. We are going to suffer thereof, and the generations of Ghanaians unborn also are also going to suffer. And what's happening is the privacy of the Ghanaian patients has been breached. We as medical doctors, when you are involved in a patient or taking history, this is supposed to be something very sensitive, something that you're not supposed to probably release to the second person, not even spouse or parents or even caretakers, without the person's permission. So this comes as a huge affront to we Ghanaians. Currently, Ghana government is saying a big no. The US government was pushing so hard and gave the deadline of 24th of April for Ghana government to agree to. Ghana government wants the deal to be revisited. So we are seeing a big no. And this, I think, is a good thing. It's a good thing from the government of Ghana. We shouldn't allow the United States to determine how we go about it just by virtue of the little money they push to us. This money that we can invest in infrastructure. But beyond that, the long term, we are going to lose big time. Luckily for us now, the National Health Insurance Scheme levy at the National Insurance Authority levy had been uncapped. So whatever comes from the National Health Insurance goes back into investments into the health sector. So I think eventually we'll get there as a country. We are accepting this deal amounts to we becoming very dependent on them, and then also exposes very sensitive data. Beyond that, it limits Ghana's ability to regulate its own data, as I said earlier. There's also a big issue of national security, because imagine currently everything is about data. Okay, if we're able to mobilize resources on an unlikely event of a pandemic, okay, like we had in COVID or any other ones that we'll probably have to fight, we have to get the number of patients distribution across the country, number of health workers distributed around the country, the data we have. So based on that, we're able to probably share the resources to be able to fight that pandemic. But imagine the data we need, our own data that we need to make such decisions to effectively combat such pandemics under the control of a foreign country. And they're also being controlled by the laws of that country. They are stored there, they are lost control there. They determine when they are going to release our own data for us. Do you think we'll be in the best position to take the right decisions? And there's a major issue that we should probably think about. And the positive side of probably returning or turning down this proposal is a strong message, okay, a strong statement to the United States that we're not going to allow ourselves to be used, okay, to be neocolonized. Right. Besides that, it calls for us to strengthen our own systems. Okay, we have to find very innovative ways of financing help. We may have to invest back into our local capacity by doing a lot of training, a lot of infrastructure, and also develop very solid policies that are going to help us. Moving forward, I think we'll look more of economic independence, because just the mere independence is not going to help. If you call yourself independent and yet you are not economically empowered, that's when you have such deals being thrown at you and then push down your through such insults. So in summary, I think this is a very bad deal, and it's a big insult to a sovereign country like Ghana. It borders on data or digital sovereignty as well as trust issues. Okay, and I think it's good that the government of Ghana has rejected this deal. We shouldn't stop there. We should take our own future into our own hands, and then develop very innovative ways and very reliable and sustainable ways of financing our own help. God bless our nation, Ghana. May God make us great and strong.
And now let's continue with our word of the day. Our word this week is resistance, the thread that runs through every story we have followed, what it means, where it lives, and how we tell it apart from its imitations. Let's hear it.
You're welcome to our word of the day segment on Africa Speaks. My name is Rashida Abubakar. Today's word is resistance. To understand resistance, we must start with the fundamental truth, or rather the fundamental lie. Every system of oppression or exploitation requires this lie to survive. Every empire, every colonial occupation, and every exploitative order depends on this single lie, convincing the majority that their suffering is natural, that inequality is permanent, and that the power belongs only to the chosen elite. Resistance begins the moment we reject that lie. At its deepest level, resistance is not merely anger. It is a political consciousness. It is the awakening that occurs when a worker realizes their labor creates wealth they would never own. When the farmer sees fertile land feeding foreign markets while local children go hungry. when the youth understands that unemployment is not a personal failure, but a systematic outcome designed to enrich a few while abandoning the many. Exploitation has changed its language. Today, that legacy lives on in a bold contemporary form. For example, in the alliance of the Sahel state, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, we are witnessing patriotic revolutions and anti-imperialist resistance. The formation of the AES represents the rejection of a neo-colonial military and economic framework. These popular forces, supported by majority of the people, are organizing to demand economic and territorial sovereignty, questioning the status of the CFA francs, and insisting that security partnership must respect national dignity rather than serve foreign interest. The power of organized labor resistance is found in the growth of national trade unions across African continent, from the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa to Ghana Trade Union Congress. Workers are moving beyond simple wage disputes. They are organizing against the privatization of essential services, proving that when the wheels of industry stop, the power of the people begins. Peasant movements like Mvuata in Tanzania are resisting agribusiness models that are forcing farmers into debt and independency on foreign seeds and GMOs. By reclaiming food sovereignty, these organized small-scale farmers are asserting that the right to control over our food system is more important than the right to profit. In Kenya, in response to France's pivot to East Africa through the 2026 France-Africa Summit, the Pan-Africanism Summit Against Imperialism is direct resistance to this imperialist offensive. As our great revolutionary leader taught us, Nkrumah on the dangers of neocolonialism, Sankara on the necessity of self-reliance, and Cabral on the transformation of material conditions, liberation is more than just changing a flag. Resistance is not only marching in the streets and picketing at the embassy. It is organizing at our workplace together with educating, agitating, and building consciousness in our communities. Imagination is integral to resistance. We must imagine an Africa where our resources feed our people first, where our healthcare is a concrete right and not a commodity, and where the majority of our people shape the heartbeat of the continent. Without vision, resistance is just rage. With vision, that rage can be transformed into a blueprint for a new and necessary world, built on a principle of Pan-Africanism and socialism. I am Rashida Abubakar. Organize your community, project your dignity, and remember, resistance begins when you stop accepting injustice as a natural order of life.
May 15th, this Friday, marks 77 years since the Nakba, the catastrophe when 750,000 Palestinians were expelled from their homes and more than 530 villages were destroyed. African and Palestinian liberation have always been linked. Our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians. The land remembers and the struggle continues. On May 15th, Palestinians across the world marked the anniversary of the Nakba, a project of ethnic cleansing in 1948 when hundreds of thousands were expelled from their homeland. The word Nakba means catastrophe or disaster, and to this day it resonates widely among the people of Palestine. In 1948, as the State of Israel was being formed, Israeli militants attacked several villages and towns in historic Palestine. Over 150,000 Palestinians were killed and over 800,000 were expelled or forced to flee their homes. Entire villages were depopulated, towns emptied, and families scattered across refugee camps in Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. According to some estimates, the Israeli militias are responsible for the ethnic cleansing of more than 500 Palestinian villages and towns in a few days' time, causing one of the largest and perhaps the longest refugee crisis in human history. These were not random attacks. The people of Palestine had for years opposed both British rule and attempts to foist an Israeli state on their historic homeland. In 1947, the Palestine Partition Plan gave Jews, who were 32% of the total population of historic Palestine, 55% of the entire territory. This was opposed by Palestinians. As the resistance to this plan intensified, Zionist militias including the Haganah, Irgun, and Lehi carried out military offensive across Palestine, including massacres such as in Deir Yassin. Palestinians fled bombardment, direct expulsion, and advancing military operations, often believing they would soon return. In 1948, a UN General Assembly resolution recognized this right to return, and to this day, those who were expelled and their descendants, who number in the millions, await the fulfillment of the promise. Israel, on the other hand, has spent decades ensuring that this promise is not met. The Palestinians who were forced to abandon their homeland did not cease their resistance. From Gaza to Lebanon to Jordan and Syria, Palestinian refugees raised the banner of revolt as each generation fought for liberation and their homeland. Their struggle was recognized across the world, where many anti-colonial movements identified Palestinian liberation as part of a wider struggle against settler colonialism, racism, and imperial domination. At the same time, Western governments, particularly the United States, became Israel's principal military and diplomatic backers, shielding it from international accountability even as occupation deepened. Today, amid the ruins of Gaza and the displacement of most of its population, amid the continuing takeover of the West Bank, the Nakba continues, but so does the resistance. Every May 15th is a moment for Palestinians and all those in solidarity with them to reaffirm their commitment to liberation and resisting Zionism and imperialism. And that does it for this week's edition of Africa Speaks right here on Pan-African Television. France was pushed out of the Sahel and is now negotiating in Nairobi. Ghana refused the price of its own health data. The AES is building something new on the ground. The order does not want to give up. And in Palestine, 77 years on, the keys are still being held. Empire is in retreat, but retreat is not defeat. It is relocation. The work is to meet it wherever it lands. So until next time, organize where you stand, defend the land, and remember, Africa must speak and Africa must be heard. My name is Victoria Wilson. Have a good evening.